Started with today's presentation. We've got a wonderful session for everyone. 802.11bh, randomized and changing MAC addresses. Again, thanks for joining us all today. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, but first, some stuff about me. Me. I'm a solutions engineer at 7Signal, CWNA certified. Got a lot of experience, wireless experience, over 25 years experience with wireless. Recognized as a Cisco innovator when I was at Cisco. I was involved with standards. For instance, I was the chair of 802.11i, which was for enhanced security. Familiar with WPA, WPA2, that's where that comes from. It's also the initial task group chair of the IEEE 802.11bh for sub-1 gigahertz operation, which is soon to take over the world. And then also I was involved with the initial formation of the Wi-Fi Alliance. It was known as WECA back then. And I got a number of patents. So that's enough about me. So what's on the agenda for this webinar? Some background on MAC addresses. And so then you might say, well, what all is the issue? And then there's some previous work that was already done. And so if that's already done, then what do you actually need this 11bh stuff for? So some MAC address background information. So one of the trivia questions was that what is the MAC address actually made up of? And you can kind of see that the first 3 bytes are made up of the OUI. So that's kind of like whose device that actually came from. So the manufacturer of the network interface card is typically what would be there. Then you'll see some, if you look at the B1 and the B2, I was talking about that unicast versus multicast bit and the globally unique versus the locally administered bit. So it's actually 2 less than 24. So by my calculation, that would make it 22 bits. But if you actually go to if you're running Windows and you go to a command prompt and you run ipconfig, this is, for instance, my laptop, the wireless card. You can actually see that your physical address, which is what that MAC address is, and that is, so each network interface card has a unique address on it. So that's kind of interesting to know, in case you didn't know that. So what's the big issue? I think for on wired side, it might not be that big of a deal, but it's a bigger concern on the wireless. And the reason why is because since the network interface card has got an identifier and it's actually broadcast out in the air, then you could have somebody that's, for instance, in the parking lot. And if the person kind of knows, oh, you know what, if I always see this MAC address and it seems like it's coming from Dave's laptop, then they kind of know that they don't actually need to kind of come into the building. Now, for me, most people won't care, but you could imagine that some people, that are more famous, or be concerned that with people tracking them, that they don't even need to come into a room itself, that they could kind of just guess that the person is local because they could kind of see that the device of theirs. Hence, there's some kind of concern about this. There was some previous work within 802.11aq, and it just kind of mentions, hey, if you wanted to use a random MAC address, here's some suggestions. And you kind of come up with a random MAC address. There's some other things that kind of point out that, for instance, that the OFDM scrambler that could be used. For people that are not familiar with, there's also like sequence numbers, there's signal strength, and so these types of things. If you're actually watching the traffic on the air, you could kind of surmise where something is coming from. So it's not just the MAC address, but MAC address is kind of like one of those things that's just kind of big out there that kind of say, oh, you know what, I kind of see that this MAC address is usually associated with this person. And so you can kind of actually see that the screenshot I have on the right is that you would see that for different types of phones that they do kind of like allow, I don't know about all the phones, but a certain number of phones will allow you to specify and tell it that you want to use a random MAC address. And the reason why is just so that you kind of say, well, to make it harder for somebody to track that when you're on your phone with Wi-Fi, that where you physically are located. I didn't get into where the boundaries of the MAC address kind of would go. Just like a quick example is that it's a layer 2 type of thing. So if I'm in my home, you wouldn't see that the MAC address on the wired side kind of go out of my home gateway. But it's still, just from the sense of wireless, you could pick it up over the air. You could kind of then see that where that it's coming from. So that is kind of a concern. And using a random MAC address can cause some issues. Hence, there's going to be some work kind of coming along in BH. So this work is just getting started. And as you might guess it, they're kind of saying, well, what are the issues? And they've got a document. I just gave a link to the latest revision, which is revision 9. So I think that just came out this week. So obviously
I'll
this
drop
could be
that
updated.
in the chat too.
Okay. And so this is where they're kind of cataloging all the issues. Now I kind of picked up some that I kind of saw that kind of resonated with me. This is not to say that these are going to be the final things that they're going to actually resolve. It's just more along the lines of kind of saying, hey, we could run into an issue here. We could run into an issue here. Now, just, kind of say, they'll have to come along and say, well, which ones do they want to actually tackle? And then when presentations come along, then they kind of, they're going to see the pluses and minuses of different proposals. So they kind of use this as a guide as to, well, what exactly are you resolving, to kind of come up to guide them as to the actual way that they settle on coming up with a solution. So for instance, parental controls. Parental controls are typically that you'll have some type of something like your access point would kind of say, oh, do you want to prohibit some device from going out to websites or something like that? And that's typically tied to the MAC address. So so therefore, if it's random, and obviously it's not going to be blocked. So that obviously would be an issue there. The other thing that kind of comes into mind that you kind of can imagine is that customer support and troubleshooting. That's if you're randomizing this MAC address and somebody says that they're having a problem, typically the question that somebody from support would ask is, well, what's your MAC address? Here it's going to be random, so that's going to be an issue there. So you can kind of see that there'd be a host of issues that could kind of come along with using a random MAC address. On past webinars, I kind of talked about the PAR. For people that are not familiar with it, that's before the task group gets started, that you have to kind of define what you want to go off and do. And that's, you create a project authorization request. And that's, and we refer to them as a PAR. And so that PAR has to be then approved. And so that PAR has been approved. And the scope is important because it kind of says, well, what exactly do you want to kind of go off and do? It actually kind of, I didn't get into it here, but there is another task group that's getting started, which is, I believe, BI, which has to do with more from a security perspective. But here they kind of mention some of the things that we were kind of talking about before. For instance, customer support. How do you kind of go off and do provide customer support when you don't have any way of knowing, well, which device is actually having the issue? Where exactly is this work getting? As kind of mentioned that they're, it's just kind of getting started. The group doesn't think that it's going to take them long. By long, these things are relative. That's when we talk about if you're coming up with a new radio, like a different PHY, Those are typically like in like the 7-year range. It can take quite a while. They're not thinking that it's going to take 7 years. This one is very somewhat limited in what they're trying to get into. There's already some previous work, and they're just kind of saying, well, maybe what we want to do is kind of come up with some proposals to help address some issues. So this is they're kind of thinking that they're going to be done in 2023. So from an IEEE 802.11 perspective, that's a short time frame. And that's also kind of like, I'm just kind of coming, giving you the timeline that's from IEEE 802.11. So the technical proposals are getting started. While you can't actually, if you're not a member of IEEE 802.11, that you can't get the actual standards unless they're been published for 6 months. You can go get the proposals. So you can just kind of go to the website, and you'll see that they make it nice and easy for you to grab the submissions that are out there. And there's also kind of like a status page that you'll be able to see. So you go to the status page, you'll see it, and then you'll be able to go to the submissions, and you'll see that they're actually coming up with different proposals that are being discussed. So currently, they're kind of going off and said they've defined their scope about what they're going to do. They're going off and saying, well, what are the issues that come up with random MAC addresses? My sense is that looks like that's just about to be finished up, probably this session, and then they'll get into proposals about how to address this kind of coming up next. So that's exactly where we're at. And this is where we kind of get into the Q&A.
All right, awesome.
So Don, yeah, I didn't even have to wake you up this time, Don.
Very engaging presentation, buddy. So okay. Ultimately, is this a big deal, these changes that are coming? What are your thoughts?
I see them as they will be important for people that are in customer support, as random MAC addresses become more popular and people see this. For the average user, it might not be an issue. It's probably good from a knowledge perspective that your location can be tracked if you're not, watching out for this. Now, is that a usual concern for everybody? I'm usually not that worried about it, but that I'm not like a well-known, and so that if you're like a celebrity, I could see that you would be concerned about it. So I'd say, hey, this is a heads up for any celebrities out there that you would probably want to use a random MAC addresses so that the paparazzi and stuff can't track you just because of your phone.
Right. How about things like a captive portal? Any impact there?
That's kind of like a good one. That I saw some early discussions about captive portals, and when I looked at their issues tracking list, that the captive portal is on there. I'm not exactly sure if they're going to address it. For people that I should back up a step and kind of get into captive portals. That captive portals, this is kind of like, say for instance, you go to a Starbucks or something like that, and you get onto the webpage, and the webpage kind of like asks you some kind of questions and says you're not going to do anything bad, and then you click on something saying I agree, and lets you get onto the internet. And how are they actually track? What they're doing typically is they're tracking your MAC address to allow you to say, oh, if this MAC address changes, it must be a different user, so I'm going to go off and present them with that page again. And so if you start using random MAC addresses, most likely you're going to have to keep on clicking every time that MAC address changes. So that would be a bit of a nuisance.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so bad? Now, if you already have if you started off with a random MAC address, you could just kind of say, well, don't change your random MAC address. So, if I go to a Starbucks, it's like, well, don't change it. How long am I actually there? Probably not going to be there for longer than an hour. So do you really need to change it within that hour time frame? And I think what the group is probably going to come along and say is just don't change it within that hour time frame. There were some other things that I was looking at as well, within the standard to say, well, as long as you just have the opinion that it shouldn't change within a given time frame or certain conditions, recognizing that it's probably not going to be an issue. But that's to be seen. The group might decide that and say, well, it does need to address captive portals. So I think that's a big question mark at this point in time, what the group will actually do.
That makes sense. Looking back over the Q&A portal here, Jason, shout out to you from the Big Easy in New Orleans. Ashish points out that Random Mac is causing a lot of issues with mobile device management. Any comments there?
I think that's where that they're kind of talking about as far as customer support, that it's going to be an issue. The one thing that I'm not sure if what this is what they're referring to, that if you're doing 11R, which is for fast roaming, and well, what that would do is that the MAC address does kind of come into 11R. So if you're changing it, that's going to cause you an issue. You wouldn't want to change it. So you might just want to put limitations on when how often, and because that the reauthentication would have to kind of happen during that change. Now, is that something that the group would address or not? I think that still remains to be seen. But my sense of that right now is that they're not going to change, address that. But they would want to address, if you're looking at it from a support perspective, saying, oh, I'm the infrastructure kind of guy, and I want to be able to kind of figure out if some device is having an issue and try to track to kind of give some guidance. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks for the question, Ashish. Question here from Steve, more of a comment and maybe looking for some feedback. It says, although MAC addresses have always been vulnerable to over-the-air eavesdropping and spoofing, some systems use MAC addresses for device authentication. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's actually one of that falls in line with the parental controls. And that's in which they kind of specify that is within their scope, and it is one of the issues that they want to address. For instance, that's if you've got some young kids at home, and it's very common to have systems that would say, oh, Johnny's MAC address, just enter it in here, and we'll make sure that that will block these certain sites. So yes, that is one of the issues that they're trying to address.
Yeah, and another comment here around university environments where MAC addresses are used for registration, a MAC registration. Is that something they're going to address as well, hopefully?
I would view that as falling into that same bucket.
Same bucket?
And so so I'd say yes.
Are you familiar with MAC denial list? That sounds like parental controls to me. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, usually you can kind of say is something on the white list or something on the black list. Mm-hmm. White list means that you put this device on there and it's allowed. Blacklist means, oh, I put this on the list, and that means disallow. So it's kind of like same thing, but from a different perspective.
Yeah, Abdul Rahim says that I guess for troubleshooting, it's not an issue, as there is a huge push to use an identify-based authentication, and they can use as a reference. That makes sense.
Yeah, if you're familiar with things like doing 802.11x, for instance, if you're doing PEEP, there's an identifier, so you don't actually need to be tied to. I think this is where they're going, is that you get tied to the identifier rather than the MAC address.
Mm-hmm. Michael's got a question here. Would this randomization be per device, per SSID, or per session?
Per device, it is going to be per session. By session, I mean, I probably have to put some text around session. If you are removing yourself from the network and connecting back up, that's if you have the same random MAC address, you'll be able to kind of get on. But if you were to use change your MAC address between that, then you'd have an issue. So for instance, if we were talking about parental controls. Now, say little Johnny has a phone, and they have also their laptop. And so typically what you'd have to do is you would have to put Johnny's laptop and phone within the, sort of the, hey, don't allow him to go out to certain websites. So likewise, it falls into that category.
All right, looks like we've got time for one more. I've got one here from Jason. Any issues with BYOD using corporate SSID with random MAC on by default?
Random MAC on by default. It really kind of depends on what your authentication type is on that BYOD. Kind of like what we were talking before was that if you're kind of using like a .1x, like a PEEP authentication for BYOD, then it's going to be the identity that you provide that's going to come in. Whereas if it's a pre-shared key, or if you were kind of like, if what you did was kind of like whitelist the MAC addresses, then that would definitely be an issue. Typically, people don't use that in a corporate environment. That's more of like a home type of thing.
Okay. You know what? And as I was saying, we have time for one more question. I'll give Chris the benefit of the doubt here. He's sent a question in as I was saying that. So let's throw one more at you, Dave. It says, from a high level, what are some ideas of how these issues would be addressed in 802.11bh? If MACs continue to be randomized, it would seem that there would have to be some sort of identifier for the client.
Yeah, so I did look at some of the, as I kind of mentioned, it's just getting started as far as what the proposals are. But there are some proposals out there you can kind of take a look at. And where they kind of go into it kind of makes sense is that, well, if it's just because when you look at the AQ, it's just like it's all it is guidance to say to the clients, use a random MAC address. Well, obviously, if it's random, it's going to be a little bit difficult. But that's what you would see by some of the proposals is that it's more than that. It's an exchange between the clients and the access point, so that the client is so the access point can kind of like say, oh, what kind of are you using some type of random MAC address? So it's kind of I would kind of limit the amount that I would say is that it involves both the clients and the access point, rather than currently what's happens is it's strictly a client decision.
Ray and I want to know if that breaks roaming.
That's well, that was one of the questions that was kind of like a good question, which has to do with roaming. If you're doing 802.11r, you can't change your MAC address. Like if you started off and you said, well, I'm starting and I've got a MAC address, and then I roam and I keep that same random MAC addresses, then things will work fine. But if you were to change it, while before you roamed, just you said, oh, as I'm roaming, I'm going to change it. Well, that would break it, and you're not. That roam is not going to work. At least the fast roam part would not work. You would have to do a full reauthentication, so that kind of defeat the purpose of the fast roam. So
makes sense. All right, Dave, you're off the hot seat. We're going to shut it down there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We've got a great webinar again next week, backed by popular demand, probably our most well-attended topic over the years is our Wi-Fi 101 session. So we'll have that again. Our celebrity speaker will be Eric Camuli, our VP of Customer Success. He'll be here next Wednesday. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Dave, great presentation as always. Thank you very much. We'll see you all next week. Thank you.